about something like the Trump presidency, okay, and the election of Trump, and to give us a better idea of, again, this idea of the consumer and then the salesman, the one who's producing something that people consume. So you have a president that gets elected, took a lot of people by surprise, but then when we dug a little bit deeper, a lot of us found out that perhaps we didn't need to be so surprised, and we learned that because there were some journalists doing some good investigative journalism that came back and said, wait a minute, what happened here? And it turns out that people wanted to know what happened here, right? So what I would like to understand a little bit better from your perspectives, I mean, perhaps from the social media side, it may be a little bit different, but you know, when you're doing your job, right, what are you trying to do? Right? I mean, in a very, very basic sense, right? Knowing that the people are looking for information and knowing that you're the ones who are tasked with giving that to them and recognizing at the same time that you're something of a gatekeeper, all right? Because you could determine what narrative you give and what narrative you don't, what facts you present, which ones they don't. But at the same time, it's also true that the people, like you were saying, do want specific things and you're aware of that. So perhaps you could get into some more specific detail about in your day-to-day experience what it is you're actually doing and what you think it is that people want from you.
Well, I think any responsible news organization, of course, is going to not just use the numbers as a means to an end. They're going to look at what the numbers say and say, again, and I think this is probably in some ways illustrative of maybe even the difference between American news and European news. I've spent some time in Germany and visited German news publishers, and we live in a very interesting, we just live in a very different news environment here in America than we do in Europe. And you know, one of those things is that I say all the time is that you know, we have to provide information that you don't know that you don't know, okay? So you don't know that the public official at City Hall is doing you know, some corrupt embezzling money, okay? You're not gonna know that you don't know that you don't know that until somebody ferrets that out for you. Sometimes that might be an internal audit or some sort of government accountability report. Very often, it's an investigative journalist. It's somebody inside the government who's leaking information to the media in order to drive a narrative. And that comes with its whole other set of questions. And this is particularly relevant to the Trump presidency, which is leaking like a really, really leaky faucet. I mean, it's like this war of leaks, which is really exciting to watch from the standpoint that, but is it like good and healthy for democracy? I mean, in the sense that what you get in such a situation like that, and this is, I think, especially true of maybe Washington reporting more than, again, something here, is that you see this very heavy reliance on Washington and at the national political level on anonymous sources. And there's all kinds of, and I don't know if we're going to go down this road, but you know, one of the challenges that we have in this country right now is that trust in the media, and that word is really fraught and complicated. The media could be everything from TMZ to what I do to what he does. So when you ask people like, what's your level of trust in the media, it can be very, very different from, say, the national political media in Washington or New York versus, say, something here. But broadly speaking, Americans don't trust the media. It's pretty reflective of just an overall trend in decline in trust in institutions, everything from religious institutions to government, to media, to schools. About the only thing that hasn't seen a massive erosion in trust in terms of American institutions is the military. And so, you know, when it comes to really deciding what it is that we cover, yes, like there is a level of, you know, we understand what it is that people want and we understand what a good story is. There are elements of a good story, but there are also things that, you know, we have to dig up and present to you because we think that they are, again, important. I sometimes call it vegetables reporting, stuff that, you know, maybe is really complicated or difficult, and it's our job to try and take complicated and difficult subjects like that and make them accessible, make them something that you can understand, again, from my perspective.
One of the biggest lessons of this first few months that actually, like, they feels like few years of Trump presidency because of the intensity of it and the pace of it, to me, as a reporter, it's being like, calm down and observe. Like the idea of calming down and not necessarily reacting to everything, which, by the way, means not accepting the sort of the method of communication that the president himself is setting, for example, with tweet. To me, has been pretty important, and I think in the context of what I do, which is trying to make my readers understand what's going on, which doesn't mean simply what Trump is tweeting, but why he's tweeting this, why this bit of information, how it relates with others, what is the broader idea behind it. It required a lot of piece that I didn't write, a lot of time that I refrained for, like, yeah, I could do this story right now because it's relevant, and I would like, no, let's wait a second. So it resulted also in, like, decide deliberately not producing sometimes. Or I can give you a more personal example. It's like, as Mike said, I wrote a little book about Trump. Is in Italian, unfortunately, but it's available on Amazon.com, so you can buy it for, like, supporting good journalism. No, I'm kidding. The book started with an idea about trying to interpret the Trump phenomenon in the broader context of American politics. And so it all started with a moment in which I sort of step back and I say, let's try to see, not follow Trump campaign at 100 miles per hour. Let's try to slow it down and to look at what happened in the past, to look at Trump in the context of the last 150 years of American history and see the references. It's to me, that moment started like an interesting set of conversation with people that sort of drove me to write a book that, for example, didn't have the ambition to be an instant book in the sense of being like very timely, but be more like a book that in my hope, like 5 years from now, we would still say something, because it's sort of informed by more factors, or tentatively is informed by more factors that allow us to understand a piece of history better, hopefully, or at least gives readers the tools to start the journey of interpretation. Let me just add something, because I was super intrigued what Dan was saying about trust and erosion of trust. I think, to me, this is probably the way I see it is the crux of the thing. Because if you think about it, journalism is all about trust at the end of the day. But not only knowledge is all about trust. We really have every experience that we have, or most of the experience that you have of reality, is mediated by someone, is indirect, which doesn't make it less true or less false. But that's the truth of it, and the fact that, like, this, and I agree with you, the relationship of trust has been eroded. It is, I think, the one of the biggest crises, or the crisis that really is impacting our world today. I think we are not aware, or we are still in the process of understanding how big this crisis of trust is.
Yeah, I think I was keying up on the same thing, and I was thinking, and you set up kind of the next round of questions very well. I mean, so first of all, I mean, I'm interested listening to the two of you about the way in which you engage, just at a professional level with the news and what it means for you when you're thinking about the public that you're working with. But then, when we talk about the public now, I mean, it's interesting to think about the relationship they have with you, right? And it seems to me, you know, and we can stick with Trump, because in many ways I think that was what led to this conversation to begin with today, and the idea of titling the talk Publishing Reality. But we're now used to this idea of fake news, right? And being in a post-truth environment. And I think that speaks exactly to what you guys are highlighting now. So, you know, as a consumer myself, and I'm looking to journalism, how do I know who to trust? And is there such a thing as being objective, right? Can news be objective? Is Trump right? Is fake news out there? What is it?
I have always hated that term, even before it got co-opted to essentially just mean anything I don't like, which is really what it's turned into. It's a term that now really means nothing, just I don't like it. And so, you know, one of the words in our talk is, the title of this talk is reality. And, you know, you can watch, say, CNN on a given night or Fox News on a given night and think that you're living in two entirely different realities, I think that the fact that the election was such a surprise to so many people, national polls actually, there's a lot of criticism about how polls were bad. The national polls in this country actually were pretty accurate, but we don't elect a president based off of national polls. We elect a president based off of the Electoral College, so really state-by-state results. State-by-state, state-level polls actually had a much worse time in predicting things. It was a very volatile and complicated cycle, but to your point, you know, especially the world that I live in, you know, one of the things, of course, that's happened in the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, is that we just have so many more sources for information now than we ever have. We are inundated by them. There is real fake news out there, which again is, yeah, there you go, which is somebody making up, and Tim, this impacts you, somebody making up a story that says that the Pope has endorsed Donald Trump. Not true. Not true. Can you confirm?
I can confirm that, yeah.
Not true. But that was a story.
Actually,
that was a story that was just riffling around through Facebook. I mean, seen by millions and millions of people. Now, it's really difficult to quantify and understand. Okay, well, so yes, that was around there, but what kind of impact did that have? Really difficult to tell. And in sort of the first, in the days following the election, because again, I think it was such a surprise. It's not that there wasn't necessarily reporting coming out of parts of quote unquote Trump country or places around the country that were suggesting like, okay, you know, there is a deep-seated anger among people in this country. I think that what social media, again, because of the explosion of information and sources, because of things like filter bubbles, because we have more choice as consumers now than ever before, it's not just picking up a few newspapers, a couple television stations, and a radio station, so I can maybe count the number of sources of news on one or two hands. Like, now it's anything. Anybody, anywhere who can start a website and work out of their apartment in Maryland and write literally fake stories. I mean, making them up in 15 minutes, writing them, and then those stories get passed around on social because we're conditioned now more than ever to believe what we see. It's really cynical in the sense that you're much more, so going back to what I said about trust in institutions, you are far more likely to trust information from your friends than you are from institutions. And so what the people who are really doing fake hoax news were doing was they were seizing upon this idea that you are far more likely to trust things from your friends. So if I can get a story about the Pope endorsing Donald Trump through your feed, I can hijack that relationship and get information to spread that may or may not be true or false. And again, combine that with the record levels of distrust in the mainstream media, and you have just this crucible of what we saw, which was lots of, combined with technology and the ability for that information to spread. If you're only talking about television stations, gatekeepers, a handful of people who control the news, and there are no gatekeepers, there are fewer gatekeepers, we're combined with the emotional attachment to trusting what our friends say over what institutions say, now you start setting up this world where things like a bunch of Hillary Clinton ballots in an Ohio warehouse are, is seen as a real story. And some guy in his apartment in Maryland can write something that's made up in 15 minutes and make $10,000 a month and profit off that. That's the world within. Again, how much of that actually swung the election? I don't know that we'll ever know. But is it a problem? Absolutely, because again, our distribution mechanisms are taking advantage of something that we're all susceptible to. And so then you enter this world where you think, okay, well, because I'm consuming more and more news from social media, it's not just me, I mean, all of you are. You're all consuming more news from social media than you were, I guarantee, 5 years ago. But in that world where every link in a Facebook feed and every link in a Twitter feed looks just as important as the next one, how do I know what to trust? There's no hierarchy. It's not like I pick up a front page of your newspaper or my newspaper, and it's some editors deciding, you know what, these are the 3 most important stories today that you need to know. Some of it's going to be maybe heartwarming, some of it's just your vegetables, like here's what they're doing with transportation infrastructure, and some things may be national in scope. We don't live in that world anymore. What is news to you is what's at the top of your Facebook feed, increasingly, seriously. That has massive implications for our democracy.
I think the distinction that then did, it's clearly true about the 2 type of fake news. I think they open up 2 different set of problems. Like the fake news, like the news produced in a basement in Maryland, seriously open up, I think, the problem of aggregation. How do we aggregate the news? How do we select the news? Who's selecting the media? And also of confirmation bias. Because ultimately, why do these news that are false, let's call them false, in the sense completely inaccurate, not facts, represent facts that never
Actually
existed.
fake news, like it's not real.
The real fake news.
Yeah, the real fake news.
Exactly. The
Dan's
real
term.
Exactly. No, you got the copyright.
Trademark.
Yeah. The real fake news, how does that work? This can spread and can makes these people making a lot of money and like spread throughout especially the social, but in general, the internet, because they tend to confirm what we want to hear. They tend to confirm our own opinion. I'm glad to hear that Trump is doing something crazy, or I really want to hear that the Pope is endorsing Trump. Maybe to justify the fact that I feel like a tension between being religious and wanting to vote Trump, for example.
Sorry, because I think I understand the distinction you're trying to make, but just to make it even more clear. You're saying there's that news which is clearly fake, so these facts actually don't exist. Then there's that news which, sorry.
I'm talking about the first category still. But I'm trying to reflect why this category exists and why it's so successful. I think because it has a tendency to confirm our own opinion or to sort of like be tailored to our wishful thinking or our wishful thoughts. And so that's why they are successful and they exist and they're not killed at the first second, like, yeah, this is false, so it's not gonna spread because everybody's gonna like debunk it in a second. No, it's not, because it confirms my own idea, so it has its own life that then goes further and further. The other fake news in the sense of like the bias ultimately, or what I don't like, I see in all honesty, and I think it coincides partly with the Trump administration, is an acceleration and an extension in an old, very, very old process, which I call the searchlight device. And I didn't make up the expression. Is actually another person smarter than me did. And I want to, if you bear with me, I want to read it like a quick quote about the guy who invented this, which is Erich Auerbach, a critic, literary critic, German. And he defined the searchlight device this way. Tell me then if it resonates or not. To me, it resonates a lot. It consists, this searchlight device, it consists in over-illuminating one small part of an extensive complex, while everything else which might explain, derive, and possibly counterbalance the thing emphasized is left in the dark, so that apparently the truth is stated, for what is said cannot be denied, and yet everything is falsified, for truth requires the whole truth and the proper interrelation of its elements. Especially in times of excited passions, the public is again and again taken in by such tricks, and everybody knows more than enough examples from the very recent past. And yet, in most cases, the trick is not at all hard to see through. In tense periods, however, the people or the public lack the serious desire to do so. I believe, I mean, let's put this thing in the context. He wrote this in 1946. And what I find most interesting about this idea of over-illuminating one side, and this, although the information you are illuminating is strictly speaking true, the big picture is false because you are like leaving elements, essential elements in the dark, because the truth is made of the interrelation between all its elements. He wrote it in 1946, and he didn't wrote it to describe mainly what you would obviously think for a German literary critic, so the Nazi propaganda. He said the real master of using this device was Voltaire. So he traced it back to the Enlightenment as the source of this, because he's making a big distinction here. One is propaganda, strictly speaking, which is I produce news that are reported that are clearly false and are made to advance my agenda or deceive the public so that I can do all kind of the power. I can sort of like do what I want with my power. And I think this other thing is way more subtle, and I see a big, enormous acceleration and extension in using this device in order to deceive in a way that is extremely subtle and extremely tricky. I don't think it's something new. I don't make a qualitative distinction between pre-Trump and post-Trump era in that sense. I'm only registering, or like at least I'm under the impression this moment is really accelerating that, really, which requires, as our book says, a serious will to look beyond what the searchlight sort of illuminates.
So from your perspective, do you think that's the case, Dan? I mean, in your work, especially in digital media, social media, is it true that you see both things, which you've spoken about, but especially this, I think, the second type of news, which is people who are doing the groundwork, but are deciding to put more emphasis on one fact than another, and that this, I mean, is this the common way that people are approaching it? Is this the way, for example, I don't know, not your organization necessarily, but perhaps your peers approach their work?
Well, I think that